a reporter who took the chief of staff's words wildly out of context, did not include the context those conversations were had within. And then further, I think the most egregious part of this article was the bias of omission that was clearly present. And we see a lot of this when dealing with the media every day. What I'll say about our chief of staff, as you've seen from not just myself, but also the entire cabinet and a groundswell of support from people on Capitol Hill who don't even work in this building about how incredible Susie Wiles has been to President Trump.
Sometimes I am a conspiracy theorist, but I only believe in the conspiracy theories that are true. Susie and I have joked in private and in public about that for a long time. And Susie Wiles, we have our disagreements. We agree on much more than we disagree, but I've never seen her be disloyal to the President of the United States, and that makes her the best White House chief of staff.
First of all, as you all saw on Truth Social, President Trump is going to be giving a joint address to, or an address to the nation, not a joint address, an address to the nation tomorrow night, live from the White House here, 9 o'clock Eastern. I know you guys will all be tuning in. It's going to be a really good speech. I was just in the Oval Office with the president discussing it. He's going to talk a lot about the accomplishments over the past 11 months, all that he's done to bring our country back to greatness, and all he continues to plan to do to continue delivering for the American people over the next 3 years. As for the Vanity Fair article, Michael, I'll take your question directly. This is, unfortunately, another example of disingenuous reporting, where you have a reporter who took the chief of staff's words wildly out of context, did not include the context those conversations were had within. And then further, I think the most egregious part of this article was the bias of omission that was clearly present. And we see a lot of this when dealing with the media every day. You will leave out important context, leave out comments and facts. You know, many people in this building spoke with that reporter, and those comments were never included in the story, probably because it didn't push this false narrative of chaos and confusion that the reporter was clearly trying to push. So what I'll say about our chief of staff, as you've seen from not just myself, but also the entire cabinet and a groundswell of support from people on Capitol Hill who don't even work in this building about how incredible Susie Wiles has been to President Trump. And he's been able to accomplish so much because of his leadership and his tenacity, but also because of Chief of Staff Wiles's leadership and her ability to effectuate his agenda.
Mr. Vice President, Jacob Bogage from the Washington Post, it's good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Merry Christmas.
Thank you. Same to you.
Unfortunately, I have to ask a bit of an off-topic question from affordability because news events do intervene, and that is the interviews that White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles gave to Vanity Fair, in which she's quoted as referring to you as, excuse me, and again, not my words, sir, but a conspiracy theorist of a decade, and described your transformation from someone who once opposed President Trump to now his vice president as an act of political expediency. And I'd like to give you the chance to respond to that, sir.
Well, first of all, if Susie, I'll trust what you said. I haven't looked at the article. I of course have heard about it, but conspiracy theorist. Sometimes I am a conspiracy theorist, but I only believe in the conspiracy theories that are true. And by the way, Susie and I have joked in private and in public about that for a long time. For example, I believed in the crazy conspiracy theory back in 2020 that it was stupid to mask 3-year-olds at the height of the COVID pandemic, that we should actually let them develop some language skills. You know, I believed in this crazy conspiracy theory that the media and the government were covering up the fact that Joe Biden was clearly unable to do the job. And I believed in the conspiracy theory that Joe Biden was trying to throw his political opponents in jail rather than win an argument against his political opponents. So, at least on some of these conspiracy theories, it turns out that a conspiracy theory is just something that was true 6 months before the media admitted it. And that's my understanding. Now, look, I do want to say something about Susie, though, because, again, having not read this article, Susie is a person I've come to know very, very well. And, you know, a lot of you probably ask yourself, what is it like behind the scenes? What's going on actually behind the scenes of the Trump administration? And I'll tell you, the president is exactly in private who he is in public. Like, I'll tell you a little story. Maybe a week or so ago, I walk into the Oval Office, and Marco and I are sitting there talking with the president about something. He says, "Stop." And he looks at our shoes and says, "You guys have terrible shoes." So he goes and gets a shoe catalog. Now remember, this is the Christmas season, so the president's got some holiday cheer. He goes and gets a shoe catalog and gets his favorite shoes and orders like 4 pairs of shoes for me and 4 pairs of shoes for Marco, because he's like, we need our vice president or secretary of state to look their very best. And, then we went back to talking about whatever major, international issue we were talking about. Again, he is exactly in private who he is in public. That's not true of most people in Washington, D.C. It's not. And I've seen so many people who will say one thing to the president's face, Democrats and Republicans, and then will do the exact opposite behind the scenes. You know why I really... You know what they are, and you know why I really love Susie Wiles? Because Susie is who she is in the president's presence. She's the same exact person when the president isn't around. I've never seen Susie Wiles say something to the president and then go and counteract him or subvert his will behind the scenes. And that's what you want in a staffer. Because as much as I love Susie, the American people didn't elect any staffer. They elected the President of the United States. And what you want in a staffer is a person who understands they are there to effectuate the will of the American people, and they're there to follow the orders of the duly elected Commander-in-Chief of the United States. And Susie Wiles, we have our disagreements. We agree on much more than we disagree, but I've never seen her be disloyal to the President of the United States, and that makes her the best White House Chief of Staff that I think the President could ask for. And the last thing I'll say is, if any of us have learned a lesson from that Vanity Fair article, I hope that the lesson is we should be giving fewer interviews to mainstream media outlets. So with that lesson internalized, I'm going to stop taking questions and just leave you with one final note. And again, it's just a note of gratitude. This is the coolest job I've ever had. Agree with us or disagree with us, I'm sure that every single person in this room made something happen to get me to this job. You went out there and voted. Maybe you persuaded one of your relatives to vote, maybe even volunteered or knocked on doors or made phone calls for us. I will never forget that my job every single day is to make it so that you guys can have a safe and prosperous life in this country that all of us love.